were mocking my husband while he was listening through a hidden recorder. Then this happened. Hey Reddit, using a throwaway account here because my ex-friends follow my main. I'm already being mocked by them. I can only imagine how much mocking they'll do if they find this post. I'm in a bit of a dilemma now as I've made a massive mistake that I now regret. I cheated on my husband and well, I got kicked out. How, why, when, and with whom, you might be wondering. Let me give you some backstory. My name is Lisa and I am a 32-year-old woman married to Timothy, also 32. We met in college and from the moment I laid eyes on him, I knew he would secure my future. You see, my goal since high school has always been security. I grew up poor, like surviving on food stamps kind of poor. I wanted a life without financial struggles, to be a trophy wife with a wealthy partner who could support my lifestyle. This desire also came from my parents, who pushed me to marry rich to lift our family out of poverty. Before Timothy, I dated with financial stability in mind, and I always looked for partners who could provide for me and my family. Then I met Timothy. I wasn't very attracted to him, but I was impressed by his intelligence and promising future. He came from a wealthy family and everyone expected him to succeed in life, much like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg. We dated for years until finally marrying 2 years ago. It took us that long to get married because Timothy was a bit hesitant about it, but after enough pushing, he finally proposed. And just like any other devious and devilish in-laws from hell, his parents never liked me and they tried all kinds of shit. From trying to control our wedding decisions until we had to sit them down and threaten to uninvite them if they didn't stop, to excluding me from property ownership by buying a house for us as a wedding gift and putting only Timothy's name on the deed, and then pressuring us into a prenup by threatening to cut Timothy out of the will. I signed it quickly because I hoped to gain their favor and maybe a place in their will. Timothy's job pays well, though he didn't become the mega success I hoped for. But it provided the financial security I sought, which made the prenup a minor concern in exchange for a comfortable life. Our life was pretty cushy thanks to Timothy's family wealth and his sweet gestures. He was very romantic, but was also very boring. He made sure I didn't have to work, so I had all the time for my hobbies. We had our cute date nights now and then, but in bed it was just okay. But here's the thing, I was bored out of my mind. The whole fancy neighborhood vibe? It was not my scene at all. I hated how fake it was. I also hated the fact that once a week we had to go over to his parents' house for dinner because, his parents didn't like me, and I wasn't banking on a big inheritance from them, so I didn't see any reason for me to go over there. Sure, Timothy was a good guy, and I liked the security he brought, but love? Nah, that was missing. I didn't love Timothy. I loved the security. Our posh neighborhood was full of fake people, especially the ladies from my book club. I only joined to fit in, not because I cared about reading. And let me tell you, those ladies were more about gossip than books. The big house, the pool, the gym, all nice, but they didn't fill the void of excitement I craved. Every day felt like Groundhog Day, just a never-ending loop of the same old stuff. I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. It was like there was a big hole in my life that needed filling. The routines were killing me. The same old social events, the forced smiles, and the fake conversations. It was all so suffocating. I needed something to shake things up, to add some spice to my existence. I craved excitement, something to get my heart racing again. But in our fancy world, everything was too predictable, too safe, too boring. Our date nights were so fake it could have been scripted, and even our luxurious lifestyle started to lose its appeal. I'd find myself daydreaming about wild adventures, about breaking free from the monotony. But every time I tried to inject some fun, it was met with disapproval or raised eyebrows from Timothy or our snobby friends. Living in this fancy bubble felt like being trapped in a beautiful prison. Everything looked perfect on the outside, but inside it was all hollow. I knew I needed a change, something to jolt me out of this boring routine and make me feel alive again. Timothy was a good guy, no doubt about it. He was loving, caring, and always there when I needed him. But if I'm being real, he could be a bit too much at times, like he was stuck in this bubble of predictability, always playing it safe, never stepping out of line. I tried dropping hints, suggesting we try new things, but he just wasn't having it. He wanted everything to be all lovey-dovey, romantic gestures and cozy nights. And don't get me wrong, that's nice and all, but it gets old real fast, you feel me? I wanted some excitement, some adventure. I wanted to feel alive, not like I was stuck in some rom-com. But Timothy, he was like a walking Hallmark card, always saying the right things, doing the right stuff, but where was the spontaneity and then in the bedroom? Oh boy, don't even get me started. It was like a script, same moves, same routine. I wanted fireworks, passion, but all I got was a flicker. I tried to spice things up, but he was too reserved, too concerned about making sure everything was perfect. I guess what I'm saying is Timothy was a great guy, but he was just too vanilla for me. I needed a bit of chocolate swirl. something to shake things up, to fill that void I was feeling deep down. During that time when I felt like there was this big gap inside me that needed filling, this big empty space inside, like I was missing out on something, that's when I bumped into Eric. Funny thing is, I usually avoid grocery stores like the plague, but fate had other plans that day. I'm usually all about ordering my stuff online and Instacarting just so I can avoid the hassle of going out. But that day, I don't know, something pushed me to step into that store, so there I was, grabbing things off the shelves, scrolling through aisles, and just minding my own business, and boom, Eric shows up. He's a good-looking guy, no doubt about it, and he started chatting me up. At first, I wasn't really into it, because I'm married. But Eric was very friendly and persistent. He helped me grab something from the top shelf, and we started talking. Now, I should have mentioned my husband right then and there, but Eric had this charm that was just hard to resist. He was very good-looking. He even offered to pay for my stuff at the checkout, but I turned him down. I mean, I've got my limits. I don't like crossing lines I shouldn't be crossing. However, we ended up swapping numbers. Eric said he wanted to stay in touch, even if it's just as friends, even though I could tell he was interested in more. I still gave him my number. And yeah, I didn't correct him about my marital status. I left my wedding ring at home that day, so he had no clue. It was like standing on the edge, wanting a bit of excitement, but also feeling guilty about it. That's where I was at. Within days of exchanging numbers with Eric at the grocery store, I was hooked on our chats. It was like an addiction. I couldn't stop checking my phone. I was always eagerly waiting for his messages. We'd talk about anything and everything, and I found myself staying up late just to keep the conversation going. We hadn't met up yet, but plans to meet up were in the works. We had decided we would go out for just a casual movie outing. Deep down, I knew it was more than innocent, but I tried to justify it by telling myself we were just friends. To cover my tracks, I became hyper-aware of my phone's whereabouts. I made sure my husband never stumbled upon our conversations. I deleted any messages that hinted at more than friendship, so I could pretend we were just friends if caught. At this point, also, Eric still didn't know I was married, so I was essentially living a lie, deceiving both my husband and Eric. When Eric asked about my social media, especially my Facebook, I dodged the question and said I didn't use social media. About a week and a few days after meeting Eric at the grocery store, we finally met up to watch the movie like we had initially planned. I chose a time when my husband would be at work, so there wouldn't be any interruptions. I also decided I would spill everything to Eric and cut ties with him after our movie date. When the day came, we met at the theater, watched the movie, and flirted a lot. I didn't hold back because I figured it was our last chance to have fun together. We talked a ton and got to know each other better. After the movie, Eric suggested grabbing coffee, and I agreed. I planned to tell him the truth during our coffee break. As we sat in the cafe waiting for our drinks, I mustered the courage to come clean. Eric was surprised but not freaked out like I thought he'd be. He took it in stride and even said he still wanted to be with me. I was shocked because I had just told him I was married, but he didn't seem to mind. He thought my marriage problems were a sign that I needed something more exciting in my life. He offered to bring back excitement and spice things up for me. It was tempting. The thought of breaking away from my boring marriage routine and having some excitement was very enticing. We talked it over, and Eric encouraged me to think about it before making a decision. It was a tempting offer, and it got me thinking. Eric's suggestion to keep things chill and just hang out as friends at first sounded cool, so we rolled with it. That meant whenever my husband went off to work, I'd give it a little time, say about 30 minutes, then head out to meet Eric. It was a breath of fresh air, ditching the same old routine at home or with the dull neighbors. Instead, I got to spend time with Eric, laughing up his jokes. Whether we were just hanging out at his house, binge-watching movies, or hitting up spots around town, Eric's vibe brought a spark into my days. I found myself cracking up more, feeling lighter, and pushing aside the boredom that had settled in my marriage. It was a much-needed change, one I couldn't get enough of as more time passed. Well, things eventually went beyond just hanging out, as you might have guessed. I knew deep down that things might progress, but I found myself not caring as much as I should have. Well, one day at Eric's place, our playful banter turned into something more, and we ended up crossing a line, and we had sex repeatedly. At first, after I was shocked and I left hurriedly, but strangely, I didn't feel immediate regret. Eric made me feel alive in a way that was missing from my marriage. When I got back home, I went through the usual motions, cooking dinner, chatting with my husband. He surprised me with flowers, a kind gesture that also stirred up mixed feelings about what had happened earlier. I tried to go to bed, but I couldn't sleep. While I don't regret being with Eric, I couldn't say I regretted being with Eric, but I was also torn about what it meant for my marriage. I knew that I had messed up, but I also knew that it wasn't really my fault as my husband had indirectly pushed me to cheat. After that day with Eric, I tried to keep my distance for a bit, thinking it might help me get a grip on things. But let's be real here. It was tough. I missed talking to him like crazy, and going back to my usual routine felt empty without our chats. It didn't even take 4 days before I caved in and started texting him again, saying sorry and all that jazz. We patched things up, and that's when our affair really kicked into gear. I know it's all kinds of messed up, but I couldn't shake the addiction I had for him. My affair with Eric became a routine, almost like clockwork. I started to distance myself from my husband. With the way I was acting, we were now more like roommates than a married couple. All my energy and attention were directed towards Eric, and that left little room for anything else. As our affair progressed, we became more daring and bolder, and I loved it. It was risky, but the rush it gave me made it difficult to pull away. During this period, my husband was really trying to make things right between us, going out of his way to show me love and attention. He didn't quite get why I was distant, but he was giving it his all. Despite his efforts, I was already too caught up in my affair with Eric. I couldn't shake the excitement and attraction I felt for him, no matter how guilty I felt about it. It was like living a double life, playing the role of a devoted wife during the day while secretly having an affair. I started getting mad at my husband, thinking he was too clueless to notice how much I was cheating on him. It made me doubt our marriage even more, feeling like he couldn't meet my needs. Then things changed when Eric ran into money problems and got booted from his place. I wanted to help, but I'd already done a lot, and I didn't want him leaning on me entirely for cash. When he asked, I had to say no, and that I was worried Timothy would get suspicious. Now that Eric was staying at his parents' place, it made our meetings much trickier as I couldn't go over to his parents' house. I was desperate to keep our connection, so I figured out a way to see him by bringing him to my house when Timothy was out. Eric's presence in our house became somewhat routine. He enjoyed hanging out in Timothy's man cave, playing video games or watching TV. Sometimes he'd even make use of our gym equipment. He'd spend hours there, only leaving about an hour before Timothy was due to come home. We would even have sex in our room right in our bed. Then things took a weird turn when Eric started acting all jealous and irritated with Timothy. It was kind of dumb because we'd been fooling around for months without any drama, and suddenly Eric was all worked up about Timothy. He'd nitpick and make fun of Timothy, and I couldn't help but laugh along because honestly, some of it was true. On Eric's last visit before everything went haywire, we hung out like usual, watched a movie, cooked lunch, and then ended up in bed. Afterward, we were just lying there chatting, and out of nowhere, Eric goes on this rant mocking Timothy. He's joking about how clueless Timothy is and making fun of his habits. I joined in because I found it hilarious, and it was also a little true. We even joked about Timothy's parents, who, like I think I've mentioned before, I never really got along with. And Eric also brought up Timothy's will, which I'd never bothered with because I haven't ever read nor seen it. It was all fun and games. Then Eric left a couple of hours before Timothy was due home from work. That day was the calm before the storm, little did I know. When Timothy got home, I could practically feel the anger radiating off him, and it was hard to ignore. He's usually good at keeping his emotions in check, but that day it was like he couldn't contain his frustration. It bothered me enough that I finally asked him what was going on. He shrugged it off, saying it was just work stuff. I wanted to believe him, so I let it go. But the atmosphere remained icy. Timothy kept his distance. He barely spoke to me, and he didn't even touch the meal I had prepared. It was strange because he usually loved my cooking. His distant behavior left me feeling very uneasy and guilty, like I was somehow to blame for his mood. It was clear something was off, and I remember that I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to take a turn for the worse. I just wish I had listened to my instincts. The next day, Timothy said he wasn't going to work. I was surprised and a bit let down because it meant I wouldn't see Eric. But at the same time, I felt a bit relieved. The whole affair with Eric had been dragging on for months, and I was getting tired of it. That whole day was strange, to be honest. I guess Timothy was still struggling with how to deal with the whole thing, because then he told me to start packing. No warning, no foretelling, just told me to start packing. Timothy's demand for me to pack up literally came out of nowhere, and I didn't understand what was going on. I laughed because at first I thought it was a joke, but he was dead serious. He cut through the pretense and accused me outright of cheating on him. I was taken aback, of course, and tried to deny it until Timothy played a recording on his phone. A recording of Eric and me mocking him in our bedroom that made everything painfully clear. I had been caught red-handed, and there was no way to talk my way out of it. Timothy was furious, and rightly so. He caught me red-handed thanks to the recorder he has placed into our room. He was now angry. He said he couldn't understand why I'd grown so distant, but now he did. I tried to explain, to plead, but he wasn't having any of it. Timothy then gave me an ultimatum, to pack my things in minutes. He told me he'd already shared the damning recording with everyone we knew, and that my reputation was stained beyond repair. He said he had already called my parents on his way home yesterday and told them to come pick me up today. He said that I shouldn't worry, and that soon my phone would start blowing up with calls. I started crying and begging Timothy to reconsider, to listen to reason, but his mind was made up. He didn't let me take anything he'd given me, not the jewelry, not even the car. I had taken everything for granted, and now I had lost it. After the mess with Timothy, my parents were pissed. They didn't hold back, saying I'd screwed everything up big time. They called me every name in the book and made it clear I'd messed up my chance at financial security. They insisted I find a damn good lawyer to fight my case in the divorce. They don't know about the cheating clause in the prenup, and I still haven't told them. The ride home with them was hell. They didn't hold back on disappointment. They made sure I knew exactly how badly I messed up. Even back at their place, their lectures still continued. That was just last week. Now I'm stuck at my parents' place, dealing with their constant anger and blame. Timothy has cut them off financially since the drama, and they were totally financially dependent on him, so that's why they're really pissed at me for screwing up. I tried reaching out to Eric, hoping for some support or at least a sympathetic ear, but he's ghosted me. It's like he heard about the chaos from someone else and decided to bail, and even blocked me in the process. To add insult to injury, my phone's blowing up with messages from people I know, and some I don't, ripping into me for being ungrateful. I'm drained and feeling pretty damn low. I want to patch things up with Timothy, but he's ignoring all my texts. In fact, the only text he has sent was one telling me that we were going to get a divorce and that I was going to get served. I'm lost and desperate for any kind of help or advice on Reddit. Update. Hey everyone, I debated whether to update because the comments and messages have been brutal. It's been months, and I'm still facing blame and insults from all sides. My husband and I did get a divorce, as I mentioned before. The fallout has been nonstop criticism from ex-friends, acquaintances, and strangers. Eric has still not messaged since or even called, and neither did he unblock me. It's sad and funny how he claimed to love me, and yet he cut me off so quick so he wouldn't go down with me. The divorce process was a slap in the face. The court proceedings were quick due to the cheating clause in our prenup. My parents, who were clueless about this clause, were furious when we ended up with nothing. They had to foot the legal bills, which left them broke and angrier at me, especially since, like I've mentioned before, they depended on my ex-husband financially. It's been a huge wake-up call watching how my folks are dealing with this mess. They've never been big on working and have always counted on Timothy's money since I married him. Now that he's cut them off, they're in a tough spot, yet they won't budge from their lazy habits. All they do all day is hang around the house and point fingers at me for their problems, but they won't lift a finger to fix things. I've tried to push them to find work, to take some responsibility, but it's like talking to a wall. Their dependence on others has finally caught up, and it's hard not to feel frustrated, especially when they're blaming me without doing anything to help themselves. Now I'm hustling to find a job to get out of my parents' place. It's tough with my pretty empty resume, but I'm determined to regain my independence and escape the toxicity. It's been a very rough ride emotionally, and I'm trying to stay hopeful for better days. I've decided not to update again and might even delete this account. The negativity here has taken a toll, and I need to focus on moving forward. He caught me in the act. I did a lot of things I was not meant to do, but there's nothing I can do again. I made a mistake. Now I am facing the trauma. My name is Victoria, and I am 25 years old. I work in a small restaurant downtown. It isn't much, but I'm grateful for what I have. The name of my husband is Pascal. Pascal is 30 years old, and he is a businessman. Pascal and I have been married for over 3 years now. Pascal and I met at the restaurant where I work. It was love at first sight for him. I just liked Pascal casually initially, but as time went on, I had to just settle for him because he was very much accommodating and he had stability, which I wanted. It was like every other day, and I was working late at the restaurant when a customer came in, and it was Pascal. He was very charming, and he was a very interesting guy. We exchanged numbers, and we went on several dates. I enjoyed dating Pascal for a while. Indeed, we had our differences, like we could quarrel, argue, but we could always find our way to each other. It wasn't long Pascal had introduced me to his family. They were very lovely, and they accepted me wholeheartedly. His mother was very accommodating. It wasn't long after that before Pascal proposed to me, and we began preparing for our wedding. We got married in the most simple way. It was very beautiful. 2 months into our marriage, I found out that marriage is not a bed of roses. It was really tough at first because I was living with someone and I was seeing the person every day, so it became so boring for me. But then I spoke to Pascal about it and we worked it out. At first, Pascal didn't take it lightly. He was very disappointed at first, but through therapy sessions that we attended, we worked it out and I knew I was not really invested like I thought. Our therapist had advised us that we should try to be very spontaneous in our relationship. So Pascal and I did all that and we were able to rekindle our relationship. Pascal and I managed to talk our problems out and he had informed me that it was time for us to have a child. I didn't want to be a joy killer, but I knew I wasn't ready for that, coupled with the problems we were facing. I knew that we were trying to work out our differences, but putting a child into the midst of all this was suicide. But I didn't want to address it, and so I avoided the topic. It was like every other day I was at work when I received a call from Pascal telling me that his mom was organizing a small intimate family dinner and we had to attend. I knew I was busy that day and I wouldn't be able to attend. I had to explain the situation at work to Pascal, but he didn't believe me. He kept going on and on about how I was not paying attention to him and how I was giving more importance to my work rather than giving him more attention. Pascal kept going on and on about how his family was important to him, and I was not respecting that. I just felt like Pascal was about to start something which wasn't really necessary. I loved his family and I believed they loved me too. I didn't know where all these side comments were coming from. Pascal can be very petty. He usually holds on to little things. When I knew that I was genuinely tired of everything, I had to report Pascal to his parents. I missed the dinner that his mom had planned, and I explained to them the reason why I missed the dinner. They understood where I was coming from, and they didn't make a fuss about it. I told them that Pascal had changed, and he was not the man I fell in love with and married. I told them that Pascal usually throws tantrums at every little thing, which is really exhausting. But at his parents' home, I received the biggest shock of my life. Pascal used my words against me. Pascal had left me out to dry by telling his parents that I was the problem because he had wanted children, and I was not ready to have them. Pascal threw me completely under the bus, and it wasn't fair. I thought that was our own problem that we were supposed to discuss on our own without bringing in a third party. I didn't know how to feel at that moment. His parents and his siblings began seeing me very differently. It was as if I was the one who was holding their family's happiness. But I knew within my heart I wasn't going to bring a child into the mist. Where both parents had unresolved issues, definitely the child is going to suffer for it. After that day at Pascal's home, his family had pushed me aside, but I knew that I didn't really care. I moved on with my life and I was just going about my work and my business. But I knew I had to solve the problems I had with Pascal because at the end of the day, he was my husband and I loved him. I was able to sit down with Pascal one faithful day, and I convinced him that we were going to have children one way or the other, but not right at that moment because we needed to plan things and put certain things in order. Pascal's business at that point was not doing well, and so I told him that we needed to put in extra work in order to have a good future for our child. He saw reasons with me and he agreed to it. And I actually saw the changes in Pascal. He began to look for more work because his own business wasn't really moving. I was somehow happy because I felt like finally my husband, who I had dated, was back to me. I knew it was a step in the right direction, even if I knew I was deceiving him then. I was really ready to have a child, but if this lie I was telling could bring the Pascal I knew once before, I was fine with it. Pascal and I did a lot of activities together. We went on dates, and he made me happy in a lot of ways. Pascal was invited to a colleague's wedding anniversary party, and he decided to take me along. It was a nice party. We danced at the party. I got to meet some of his friends who are close to him, and they received me so nicely. I got to mingle at the party. I met some amazing group of girls there. We immediately clicked, and we became friends. We planned to meet up after the party, and we did. We met up at a nice place and we talked about a lot of things. They were all radiating positive energy, which I somehow needed at that point. We talked about everything. The one I was very close to was Esther. Esther was very easygoing, very loud, and very beautiful. It was really nice to get to know her. At that point, she was already my best friend. I felt like she understood me and I also understood her. I had finally found someone I could speak to because there are days I want to just rant to someone in order for me to be relieved. I was happy because Esther was already my friend. She was just a funny soul. It was like every other day, and I was trying to get hold of Pascal because he had traveled for work and he was out of town. When I got hold of him, we talked for some time and I got ready for work. On getting there, I found out that there had been a fire outbreak at the restaurant, and immediately I became very exhausted. This restaurant had been able to put food on my table ever since I was in college, and the old couple that had the restaurant meant a lot to me. Went home and I began to cry because I knew that I had lost my job and there was no hope of getting another one. I immediately tried to reach Pascal, but it was not connecting, and I decided to call Esther. She came as soon as she could, and I was very happy because she gave me a lot of comfort. She was able to cheer me up, and I was somehow relieved. I trusted Esther to make me laugh. It wasn't long when Pascal had called me. I explained everything to him, and he also comforted me, telling me he was going to come very soon so he could be with me. Weeks after the incident, when Pascal had returned, he told me that he was going to look for another job for me, but I had already started looking for another job. I didn't want to depend on my husband for anything, and I knew that he was happy about that. He wanted me to just stay home and be a housewife. So when he told me he had been looking for a job for me, I didn't really believe him. With the help of Esther, I was able to get another job. The pay wasn't much, but it was definitely okay. At least I wasn't going to be just staying at home. I decided to go see the old couple that owned the restaurant that got burnt, and I sympathized with them because somehow they had become my family. A few months later, I was already settling into my new job. It was going smoothly, and Esther had told me she wanted to take me and my husband to dinner. I accepted the invitation, and I told Pascal about it. He had never met Esther, but I had told him a lot about her. I introduced them on that day, and we got right into ordering our food. I excused myself to go to the restroom when I bumped into a guy coming out from the men's room. I apologized immediately, and he told me to forget about it. He complimented me, and our conversation started from there. He told me he was into the restaurant business, and I decided to exchange numbers with him. He told me his name was Elijah. We talked for some minutes, and Esther came looking for me, and I had to leave. I went to the restroom and came out. Esther asked me about Elijah, and I brushed it off. We had dinner, and we talked for a while. The next day, I received a call from Elijah inviting me to his restaurant in order for me to check a few things. After work, I went over there, and I was amazed. Elijah was really into the restaurant business, and he was also a chef. He showed me around, and his restaurant was really lovely. Elijah told me that he was looking to expand, and since I had experience in the field, he wanted me to work at his new branch. I told him that he didn't know me, and he was planning to entrust his business in my hand. He told me I was good at it and that he believed in me. I told Elijah that I was going to think about it and get back to him. I went home very happy, and I told my husband about it. Pascal wasn't happy that a random guy was about to help me. I told him that he should be very happy for me because I saw a job that was going to pay me good money. He told me he was only going to allow me to take the job if I let him meet Elijah. I told him that it wasn't his decision to make, but in order for peace to reign and for my own peace of mind, I decided to ask Elijah if he would want to meet up with my husband before I could accept the job. Elijah agreed, and he told me when he was going to be less busy, and I set up the meeting. Elijah made me draw out the menu for the restaurant, and preparation was underway. I did everything needed for the opening of the restaurant, down to the decor, the cottons, and all. It felt like I was opening my own restaurant. It felt so surreal. Elijah and Pascal finally met, and I was grateful to Elijah for putting the mind of Pascal at rest because he thought there was something going on between me and Elijah. But Elijah was just straightforward, and he told Pascal that it was just business, nothing more. We opened the restaurant, and it was very beautiful. People loved our food, and they kept tripping. Overall, it was really good. Money was coming in, and Elijah was very happy. He gave me a huge salary and a good bonus. I was really grateful because it looked like a dream come true. A few weeks after the opening, Elijah had told me he wanted to take me out to celebrate because I had brought more money for him through the branch I was heading to. I was also very happy because everything about me changed completely. I could afford anything I wanted, and it looked like my husband wasn't happy for me. He was always so cold to me anytime I was discussing work or anything related to Elijah. He could always say he was not interested. And when I told him about the dinner that Elijah had invited me to, he became very angry, and I didn't really care because it was my turn to shine and I wasn't going to let anyone dim it. I got ready and I left for dinner. I came outside and there was a car waiting for me. I felt so happy and I left for the dinner. Elijah and I met up and I told him how grateful I was for the pampering, and he told me it was nothing. We had a lovely dinner. The food was nice and the ambience was wonderful. A few minutes into the dinner, Elijah kept moving in a certain way that I didn't understand. He was very gentle with me, and I brushed it off because he had told my husband that he didn't see me as anything more than just a friend. I went home that day and I didn't find Pascal at home. I called his phone, but it was unreachable. I became worried because it was unlike him to switch off his phone. I decided not to panic, and so I called Esther to talk to her about how I spent my evening. She had told me how happy she was for me, and how jealous of all the fun I was having without her. Esther had traveled for the weekend to go see her mom. The next day, Pascal came home smelling like cheap perfume and alcohol. I asked him where he had been all night, and he told me it wasn't any of my business. I didn't know when I started crying because I knew he had cheated on me, because I knew deep in my gut. I didn't know where I had gone wrong to be treated in such a way by my husband. That day, I went to work feeling so low. I decided not to let that weigh me down, and I went so hard at work. I occupied my mind till it was time for lunch when I received a bundle of flowers from someone. At first I thought it was Pascal that was trying to apologize to me, but when I saw that it wasn't from him, I was a little bit disappointed. But I received a call from Elijah asking me if I liked the flowers. I was a little bit cheered up by his gesture, and I thanked him for it. I went about with the rest of the day, and when it was time for me to go home, I went home and I saw Pascal passed out on the ground. I immediately called for help, and he was taken to the hospital. I was very worried about him. A few hours later, the doctor had told me it was an alcohol overdose and he should stay away from alcohol for some time. The Pascal family came as soon as they could, and I explained everything to them too. We were all waiting for him to regain consciousness. I was exhausted from work, but I had no choice but to stay at the hospital overnight. I called Elijah and told him about what was happening and that I was going to take some time off to take care of him. He agreed, and I found one of my assistants to take care of the restaurant before I resumed. A couple of hours later, Pascal woke up and the doctors checked on him and they said he was okay to go home. They asked me to take very good care of him and that he should stay off alcohol for some time. We went home and I had to have a sit-down talk with Pascal and his parents. They asked him the reason why he had resulted in drinking. He said that his business was doing well and that he was very broke. I had to explain to him that that shouldn't give him the right to drink himself to death. But he wouldn't even listen to me and his parents weren't helpful, so I excused myself. The next day I had a conversation with him that I was able to convince Elijah to give him a push in the right direction, and he was going to get the job, but he said I shouldn't do anything like that, and that he was not going to accept anything from Elijah. He got angry and walked out of the house. I decided that I was going to invite Elijah over in order for him to talk sense into Pascal, but as I was trying to reach him, it wasn't going through. After a few hours, he called me and he told me he was free and he could show up to my house in the evening. I kept on waiting for Pascal, but he didn't show. Out of frustration, I decided to have a few drinks. Elijah came over and I explained everything that had been happening to him and how my husband needed help. He agreed to help Pascal and I was happy. Far into our conversation, I discovered that I was already tipsy. One thing left to another and Elijah and I kissed. It escalated from that to us ending up on the bed. I was so lost in what we were doing that I didn't know that Pascal had walked in. Pascal dragged Elijah and they both started fighting. I started screaming and calling our neighbors for help. The fight ended up with Pascal severely injured. I tried to help him, but he refused my help. Pascal asked me to leave the house because he needed space, and I respected his decision and I left with Elijah. Pascal can be very destructive if he is angry as we were leaving. I could hear him destroying things and I immediately felt bad. I did want to think about my marriage at that point because I knew it was a lot to take in at once. I asked Elijah if he genuinely had feelings for me and he said he did. The next day I went about my work in the restaurant. Elijah was kind enough to open the doors of his house to me. I was planning that by the end of work I could go back home to get a few of my things. I got there and I met Pascal's family there and they were all insulting about how I was very cheap and all. I tried to get to Pascal in order for me to speak with him, but they wouldn't let me. It was all too exhausting, and so I decided I was going to have a conversation with him if he was alone. A few days later I received a package and inside were my divorce papers. I didn't know where I started crying. I tried to call Pascal, and when he picked, he threatened me on how he was going to make my life very miserable. He had told me he was going to make me regret ever cheating on him. I told him that I didn't mean to cheat and that it was all a mistake, but he ignored me and he switched off his phone. I went to Elijah's house that day and I cried like never before. My foolishness had made me lose my marriage. I started to regret all the wrong decisions I made regarding my relationship and marriage to Pascal. The following day I went to our house and I was told that the house had already been sold. I called Pascal, but he ignored my calls. I was able to track him down to his family house, and at that place I begged Pascal to please reconsider and also for us to work out our differences. But all my pleadings went to deaf ears. I went back to Elijah's house telling him I was already tired of crying and that it was time for me to sign the divorce papers and never look back. I got a lawyer and he went through it and we discovered that Pascal was planning to take everything we built all for himself. The house we bought he sold without telling me, and now all the properties we acquired together he took everything for himself, and he left me nothing. I told my lawyers that I was not ready to fight any divorce. I signed the papers and I was done with Pascal and his baggage and I was freed. I moved on from him and I concentrated on expanding my restaurant business, which was growing with the help of Elijah. Update: hello guys, so I was able to leave the marriage without anything. Everything I ever worked for Pascal claimed it was all his and he didn't leave anything to me. I didn't want to fight him because honestly I was exhausted. His drama was too much. Pascal held on to something that had happened while I was drunk and he refused to forgive me. I genuinely loved Pascal and I was trying to make our relationship work. I didn't plan for what happened, but it did. I made up my mind that I wasn't just going to take a step back and wallow. I decided to make something good out of everything. Elijah and I agreed that it was okay for us to just stay friends and not compromise our work relationship. He apologized for how the marriage turned out, and I told him it wasn't his fault. We have remained friends ever since, and together we have opened more restaurants. Pascal's revenge on me was so cruel, he literally turned everything against me. Sometimes the trauma is so fresh in my head, I wished I never got into any form of relationship with Pascal. He was very cruel to me, and I knew I didn't deserve any of that.